Beneath the chilly Atlantic, a grand ocean liner that once glittered with brass and crystal now lies on its side, a hulking ruin where sunlight rarely reaches. For decades, it has pulled people toward it, historians, thrill-seekers, photographers, and divers drawn by the idea of stepping into a sealed moment of the past. But that magnetic pull has a dark ledger. The ship is not only a historical treasure, it is a graveyard and a hazard zone. This is the Andrea Doria, and this is why many consider it the most dangerous shipwreck dive spot you never knew existed. On a fog-choked night in July 1956, the Andrea Doria, an elegant Italian transatlantic liner, slid out of New York harbor and into an ocean thick with visibility near zero. The Swedish motor ship Stockholm, crossing paths a few hours into their voyages, emerged from the same wall of white. Miscalculations in steering and navigation, compounded by poor visibility, led the two ships onto a collision course. The Stockholm's bow struck the Andrea Doria on the starboard side, tearing open a massive breach. Within minutes, the big liner began to list sharply, her starboard rail plunging toward the sea. Lifeboats proved inadequate against a sudden severe tilt. Passengers and crew scrambled. Over a harrowing 11 hours, the disciplined work of rescuers, private vessels, the Coast Guard, and quick-thinking crew members saved most aboard. Still, 46 lives were lost in that chaotic night. The Andrea Doria, mortally wounded, slipped beneath the waves off Nantucket, becoming a new landmark on the ocean floor. In the years immediately after the sinking, the wreck sat in a strange state of preservation. Divers who explored it in the early weeks and months reported intact furnishings, dining rooms frozen in place, and corridors that seemed to hold a moment in time. Photographers and documentary teams captured haunting images. A grand staircase paused mid-fall, chandeliers tangled with seaweed, porcelain plates still sitting on tables. To many, the wreck felt less like a ruin and more like a sealed museum, an irresistible destination for the adventurous and the curious. One of the earliest explorers to venture near those halls described the sensation of walking into history, of brushing a hand against the fabrics and fixtures that belonged to a vanished age. But time at sea is relentless. Salt corrodes, storms batter, and currents tug. What began as an eerie preservation transformed, gradually and inexorably, into structural collapse and chaos. Steel loses its temper in seawater, becoming brittle, buckling under pressure. Sections of the superstructure sheared away, the bridge disappeared, funnels and masts collapsed or were stripped free, decks sagged and caved in. Interiors became labyrinths of twisted beams, torn bulkheads and collapsed stairways. What once appeared as intact rooms became precarious cavities, ready to trap anyone who entered. The wreck's physical state alone would be hazardous. Layer on top of that the environment in which it rests. The top of the wreck lies around 160 feet below the surface, with significant portions plunging beyond 200 feet. Those are not trivial numbers. At those depths the ocean is cold, light is almost entirely gone beyond a few meters. Visibility can change in an instant. The tidal currents around the ship are often strong and unpredictable, sweeping through openings and around flared hull sections, with gusts that can separate a diver from a buddy or a guideline. The seabed is silt-rich and fine. Stir it, and you create a curtain of darkness that can turn any interior into a black box. And then there are the physical artifacts left behind, ropes, cables, and line, some originating from the wreck itself, others added over years by descending teams. Those lines can entangle a limb or a hose in moments. For divers, the Andrea Doria presents a stacked set of hazards where small mistakes become catastrophic. Depth increases physiological stress. The deeper you go, the more narcotic the effects of breathing air can be, a phenomenon divers call narcosis. It impairs judgment and motor control, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. At depth, a diver's breathing gas behaves differently, and the body absorbs more inert gas. That demands careful ascent profiles and time spent pausing on the way up to avoid decompression sickness. Those decompression obligations, required stops during ascent to safely off-gas inert gases, are long and unforgiving. Miss them, and you risk pain, paralysis, or worse. Inside a wreck, A diver can become entangled in metalwork or old mooring lines. A single snag, a burst of silt, or a lost guideline in a pitch-black corridor can lead to disorientation. In those conditions, lost time equals rising risk. Combine that with the cold and the possibility of equipment failure or a sudden surge of panic, and the wreck becomes an equation with many dangerous variables. The human record bears out how lethal the combination can be. The Andrea Doria has claimed the lives of numerous divers since the first expeditions pushed into its spaces. These are not sensationalized anecdotes. They are somber reports of individuals who went down into the wreck for many reasons: curiosity, scientific study, the thrill of exploration, and did not return. Each case teaches something about the wreck and its warnings. One of the most cited early diver tragedies was the case of John Ormsby in 1985. Ormsby was an experienced diver who entered the wreck and became entangled in cables. Rescue attempts were hampered by the wreck's depth and conditions. Reports indicate that tools and lines used to free him were unsuccessful. The image that remains in many accounts is of a diver caught in metal and line inside a structure that was collapsing around him. His death highlighted a basic truth: entanglement in the Andrea Doria's interior can be fatal before help can arrive. Then there is Robert Santulli, a name that recurs when people speak of the wreck's dangers. Santulli was reportedly on his first Andrea Doria dive and encountered problems that spiraled rapidly. Accounts suggest possible narcosis or oxygen-related physiological issues, followed by loss of regulator function and an encounter with his partner's gear during a panic-driven sequence. Investigators have pieced together scenes from dive profiles and recovered equipment. Many aspects remain speculative. What these reports converge on is the speed with which a dive can go from controlled to chaotic at those depths, and how panic, a human reaction, interacts with technical hazards in a way that usually ends badly. Richard Roost's case in 1998 brought fresh questions. Roost was an experienced technical diver, respected for his rigor. He descended to the Andrea Doria and did not return. Later, his body was recovered, positioned wedged in a narrow part of the wreck. There was no clear sign of entanglement. Some inspectors suggested that a structural collapse may have trapped him. Others noted that he may have become disoriented or suffered an equipment malfunction that prevented him from moving. Again, certainty eludes investigators. Reports often prefer measured language like "cause not published" or "investigators believe." Roost's death was chilling because it involved an experienced diver who nevertheless fell victim to a feature of the wreck that is not easily mitigated: sudden structural failure and the unpredictability of interior spaces. Long before those deep-sea fatalities, a harrowing reminder came close to shore. William Edgerton died during harbor training exercises in 1956. His death was not at the Andrea Doria itself, but it served as an early caution, a harbinger of how routine training could go tragically wrong. The specifics of his case underscore how even controlled environments can hide danger, a lesson amplified dramatically when the setting shifts from a harbor to a wreck at extreme depths. More recently, in 2011, Michael Leprade disappeared from the shotline during what began as a nominally standard excursion to the wreck. He was later found with a supply of air still in his tanks, which led investigators to speculate about a sudden separation from his gear or regulator malfunction. Those findings were preliminary and not definitive, but they illustrate another hazard. Loss of breathing access, whether through equipment separation or regulator failure, can be fatal in an instant at depth, especially within a complex interior where ascent is not a simple vertical climb. These individual stories accumulate into a grim pattern. By 2017, reports catalogued roughly 18 diver fatalities associated specifically with the Andrea Doria, though the true total can be difficult to pin down because records vary and some incidents are incompletely documented. That number alone is sobering. When compared to other wrecks, the Andrea Doria's toll is striking. It has been called by some divers the Mount Everest of scuba, not because the dive is technically impossible, but because it combines high difficulty, high consequence, and a steady stream of attempts from divers attracted by its legend. Popularity matters. The more people who attempt something dangerous, the more likely tragedies will occur. That exposure bias explains part of the death toll, but exposure alone does not account for everything. Few other wrecks offer the same lethal cocktail of depth, advanced decay, confined spaces, unpredictable currents, and a long history of decreasing structural integrity. To understand why the Andrea Doria is so hazardous, it helps to consider, in non-technical terms, how the environment and physiology interact. At the depths where the wreck rests, the pressure on a diver's body is several times greater than at the surface. This pressure affects how gases dissolve into tissues. Breathing compressed air at those pressures can cause mental impairment, narcosis, that resembles intoxication. It clouds judgment and slows reaction time. That's why so many incidents include accounts of unexpected disorientation or poor decision-making under duress. Decompression is another invisible time bomb. When a diver descends, inert gases like nitrogen dissolve into tissues. If that gas is not allowed to leave the body gradually during ascent, bubbles can form, leading to decompression sickness, a painful and potentially disabling condition. As a rule, deeper and longer dives require longer periods of staged ascent called decompression stops. On the Andrea Doria, these stops can be lengthy. You don't simply ascend, you must spend time at intermediate depths, sitting quietly and slowly letting your body off gas. Omitted stops, shortened profiles, or rapid ascents are major contributors to fatal outcomes. Entanglement and silt are more immediate sensory hazards. The wreck's interior is a maze of torn metal and flaking bulkhead. A diver who kicks up bottom silt converts a usable space into a lightless void. Without a visible reference or a guideline, it's possible to turn in circles, losing one's sense of direction. In a blacked-out corridor, every move risks striking steel, tearing hoses, or entangling in loose lines. Even a practiced diver can make a wrong turn in that environment. And because the wreck is listing, up and down can be misleading. You can be moving through what looks like a horizontal deck that is, beneath the surface, actually angled steeply. That distortion of orientation compounds the danger of entrapment. Structural collapse is another variable. Sections of the Andrea Doria have failed suddenly over the years. Photographs and surveys show sizable holes where decks once were, mangled supports, and places where bulkheads have given way. A diver maneuvering through a narrow corridor can trigger a collapse, or have a pre-existing collapse seal an exit behind them. The deadliness is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is banal. A ladder that snaps, a hatch that jams, a beam that falls. Yet each small failure can prevent egress in a situation where time is already short. The wreck has also attracted a peculiar kind of risk. Equipment left by other divers. Over decades, teams have run lines, tied off reels, and anchored shot lines. Some of those lines are frayed, others are poorly placed. New divers may rely on the presence of a line or expect a clear path where none exists. Old lines can mislead, tangle, or give a false sense of security. Salvage operations and repeated penetrations create debris fields that complicate navigation and rescue. Human psychology plays an outsized role. The Andrea Doria's lore seduces. The wreck's reputation as a frozen tableau of the past tempts divers to venture into areas beyond their comfort or certification. Confidence can become hubris, fatigue, the adrenaline of exploration, and the seductive visual of a chandelier or a dining room can motivate someone to push limits. Once pushed, retreat is rarely as simple as turning around. Panic, in particular, is lethal. At depth, panic accelerates breathing, increases gas consumption, and can lead to rapid escalation of problems, out-of-air emergencies, poor buoyancy control, and loss of mental clarity. Authorities and investigators have tried to learn from each incident. Some causes remain labeled as speculative. For others, equipment and environmental factors are clear contributors. In response, the diving community has tightened standards for what constitutes an allowed penetration or expedition to the Andrea Doria. Professional teams operate with meticulous planning, redundancy in equipment, strict team protocols, and conservative dive profiles. Yet even with those precautions, the wreck has continued to claim lives. That persistence speaks to the wreck's uniquely hostile mix of variables, the kind of place where expertise reduces risk but cannot eliminate it. Arguments arise over whether the Andrea Doria is truly the deadliest wreck for divers. The case for it is strong. A large number of fatalities across decades, a consistent pattern of depth-related physiological incidents, entanglement and loss of orientation cases, and the wreck's accessibility to recreational and technical divers alike. Comparisons are complicated by record-keeping and differences in popularity. Wrecks in other regions may be deadly, but far less frequented, so their death totals are lower by virtue of fewer attempts. Analysts often point to exposure bias. More dives on a site yield more opportunities for tragedy. Yet the Andrea Doria's combination of deep, complex interiors and ongoing structural decay makes it dangerous even when compared to other well-attended wrecks. To put numbers in context, consider this. The wreck's uppermost structures start at around 160 feet, deeper than typical recreational limits, and well into what divers call the technical realm. Below that, the ship slopes into areas beyond 200 feet. Those depths require planning, experience, and staged decompression stops on ascent, commitments that many divers may underestimate. As of reports compiled by 2017, around 18 divers had died in association with the wreck. That total sits against the larger human toll of the original sinking, 46 lives lost in 1956, linking two eras of tragedy, a dramatic public disaster on the surface and a quieter, cumulative tragedy beneath it. The wreck's story raises uncomfortable questions about curiosity and respect. Why do people keep going back? Part of the answer is the lure of history. To stand where passengers once dined, to photograph a vestige of a moment locked in steel, is to touch the past. Part of the answer is challenge. The wreck represents a test of skill, endurance, and nerve. But part of it is human contradiction. The same fascination that honors history can feed a dangerous appetite for conquest, a desire to be the one who sees something no one else has seen. On the Andrea Doria, that appetite has often outpaced prudence. There have been attempts to limit access and to educate those who seek the wreck. Professional expeditions, scientific teams, experienced technical groups, and sanctioned recovery efforts bring level-headed preparation. They operate with redundant gear, stage support teams, and contingency planning. Their successes and their tragedies both illustrate that respect for limits matters. And yet, no amount of planning can make a place immune to collapse, a current's sudden shift, or the fragile chemistry of human decision-making under pressure. So how should we answer the title's claim? Is the Andrea Doria truly the most dangerous shipwreck dive spot many people never knew existed? The honest answer is a measured one. It is arguably one of the deadliest and certainly among the most hazardous. That designation rests not on a single factor, but on a lethal interplay: depth, decay, environment, human psychology, and history. Its death toll is high relative to many other wrecks. Its conditions are unusually treacherous, and its popularity means a steady stream of divers continually tests the limits of the site. Exposure bias explains part of the record, but not all of it. Even the most experienced teams have met with misfortune on her decks. We should speak of the Andrea Doria, with a mixture of fascination and sobriety. It is a place of museum-level historical interest, and simultaneously a reminder that the sea keeps its own laws. The wreck has given researchers and historians priceless photographs and data, preserving artifacts that teach us about mid-20th century ocean travel. But its lessons are double-edged. For every evocative image of a porcelain plate or a sunken staircase, there is a story of a human life, lost in pursuit of that image. If you find yourself drawn to stories like this, deep-diving histories that unravel human drama beneath the waves, consider subscribing for more. These are not tales meant to glorify risk. They are chances to understand where curiosity meets consequence, to learn why respect and caution belong at the center of exploration. In the end, the Andrea Doria stands as a complicated monument. It is a testament to a tragic night in 1956 and to decades of human engagement with the deep. It is a cautionary emblem. The past is tempting, but the present is perilous. To honor those who perished, both in the sinking and in subsequent dives, we must keep telling their stories with clarity and care, and we must insist that fascination never becomes a substitute for respect. If you want to explore more of these deep histories, or support further research and bonus content, check our Patreon or become a channel member. And if you haven't already, subscribe for future episodes. The sea keeps its own tally. We owe it, and the people who have been lost within it, a sober remembrance.